Hey class, welcome back. In this video, you're going to learn how to rhetorically analyze and also do webbing from that kind of analysis. So this is an activity that's usually asked of you in introductory courses in college composition, so 1101, 1102, and a professor might ask you to watch a TED Talk or read an article and rhetorically analyze a text. So I'll talk to you about what does that mean, how can you prepare to do that, and then of course, how can you begin creating your own arguments and being a better rhetorician in that sense, right? So this PowerPoint will help you understand that. Alrighty, so how to rhetorically analyze a text. That's what we'll talk about in this one. Now, what's rhetoric, right? Simply put, you can find this in your textbook, or perhaps you've already seen this kind of term already, right? It's basically how do humans put together language and symbols to influence, to persuade, to get people to do certain actions or believe certain things. So you can look even at something like a meme, like the one of Lisa Simpson here. That is even rhetoric. So that is to get us to be emotionally engaged, right? So some kind of comedy to make us also think, perhaps in some sense, what is the difference between salt and sugar. So even something like a meme has rhetoric instilled within it. Now, a lot of this began from Aristotle discussing what is rhetoric, how do we appeal to different writers, how does a speaker or a creator of an argument put that forward. Now, what he would argue is that there are three main appeals: pathos, egos, logos. You'll see the last one there, Kairos. I'll expand upon that one later. But yeah, this is what we're going to be talking about, particularly in this video. Okay, so pathos, particularly, you can see the very, very sad dog advertisement there on your right. Save all the tail waggers, right? So you can see from that, it's really based on emotion, right? When an argument is based on trying to get the audience to feel something so they will do X, Y, or Z or believe X, Y, or Z, whether it be spending money, adopting dogs, saving the rainforest, you name it, right? So emotions like fear, love, hate, sadness, sympathy, right? All of these, hopefully we're having these emotions, right? Hopefully they are in play when we're trying to get a audience or we're trying to craft a certain argument that is based on emotions, right? Okay, so there's an example there on your right with the save the tail waggers dog. Ethos. Okay, so what is ethos? It's basically how a speaker or writer, the person creating the argument, proves their credibility or why they're trustworthy, right? So you'll see my example. There is me graduating from my PhD program, not just putting that goofy photo up for anything, but I'm showing my credibility as someone that has a certain degree that's gone through certain ranks of academia to teach you this course, right? Hopefully it gave you a little laugh. If not, whatever, that's okay too. But yeah, this is me showing you my credentials. So I have a bachelor's, a master's, and a PhD. So that's my credentials in a certain study. Objectivity, in that sense, I'm trying to say that I'm not taking one or the other side. I'm just trying to analyze something or tell you about a certain scenario or a certain idea without really taking sides. I'm just trying to look at this study without my opinion, just looking at it as what is right or wrong or what's truth or factual. Also, the kind of language that I use, what kind of language it would be different if I was speaking to you as a friend, outside of school, or me speaking to you as your professor. I have to use certain language that's persuasive or sounds professional, right? Dress, same idea. If I came to class wearing my graduation robe, you might think I'm a wizard. That probably won't be as professional as possible. But if I dress up, then maybe you'll take me more seriously and say, okay, this guy seems like I should listen to him. Also, the notion that you've conducted your research, you're knowledgeable on a subject. So in case maybe perhaps astrophysics isn't your field, well, at least hopefully you've read about it and said you can quote from certain things, so I can know that you as a writer or someone that's trying to persuade me have taken the time to read up on a certain subject. And then, of course, endorsements from other experts, right? So if I have other professors or academics that say, yes, Dr. Chanus knows X, Y, and Z, that could in some sense tell you that I know what I'm talking about, and hopefully you'd see me as a credible or trustworthy source. So ethos is really based upon the speaker or the creator of the argument, because they're the ones really trying to make the audience believe them or find them as trustworthy people. Okay, and then logos. How an argument appeals to reason and logic, right? Particularly when we find logos, most of us will say, okay, this is hard data, statistics, established facts, right? Most likely from peer-reviewed journals or studies from academics or experts. So we can look at these kinds of facts and studies and say, okay, if X many number of dentists recommend this toothpaste, then perhaps that's a good argument to use it, right? Now, of course, we can evaluate that study. We can evaluate who are these dentists. Are they credible? Are they trustworthy? But we're going to go off logos here and say, well, if these many dentists say X, then perhaps that's the most logical thing to do. If the World Health Organization or the CDC is telling us to wear face masks because it'll prevent the spread of COVID-19, well, perhaps that sounds like a good idea because that's the most logical thing from the people that have the most facts based upon it. We can also look at logical connections between claims, right? Is something just a logical idea? Is it a logical argument to give us, right? If we do X, it will reduce Y. If we buy certain things, then it will help us feel X, Y, or Z, right? Does that seem logical? Of course, we need to put pressure on that too, because logic in itself can be fuzzy sometimes, but we can look at that. And then, of course, is it a reasonable argument? This could be based upon the audience again, right? So you have to think there's not just the speaker or person creating the argument, but there's also the audience. So does the audience feel that that's reasonable? Again, sometimes reason is subjective, so that really depends on the scenario. Okay, so those are the three main appeals that Aristotle was telling us about, and the ones that you've learned about either in your textbook or in past lectures. Now, together, that's what Aristotle and other rhetoricians would say is an effective argument. Something that uses all three in a nice, equal in some sense way, right? So you'll see that ethos is on top there. That comes from the writer or speaker. So your credibility, your trustworthiness. The audience feels the pathos because that's the emotion that they're driven to feel. And then, of course, logos is instilled within the argument. Now, if all three of those appeals are working, you'll have what's called an effective argument, something that should hopefully persuade or entertain your audience, right? So your purpose might be to persuade, to entertain, to inform. It's all dependent on that. And then, of course, you have to think about your audience. Perhaps your audience isn't really looking for pathos. Maybe they want more logos. Maybe there's more academic sides or scientists. They're looking for logos. They don't want you to talk about emotions, right? That's not what's persuasive to them. Or maybe, it's a different group that is more leaning towards taking action if there's pathos around. And then, of course, the very top of ethos, right? You got to think about what the writer or speaker, what do you want to reveal about your credibility or trustworthiness to the audience to make it seem effective, your argument overall. Now, there's one more. Sometimes it's skipped over in textbooks, but I want to add this to you because it's so important. Kairos, right? This is how an argument uses time to be persuasive. So consider the social situations that we're in today or historical situations, right? I've put two clips there on the right, one showing people at a climate strike, right? So climate change is a big issue right now, and you see a lot of youth coming out speaking about it. And then on the very next, the one below that, the slide below that, or the picture below that, is Black Lives Matter protest, right? So we have people here speaking about what's going on at that time. Now, Kairos is instilled with both of these images because we have groups that are seizing a certain moment or collective consciousness saying, okay, this is an issue that we want to speak about. Now's the time to propel our argument to either think about climate change or think about the way that people are policed, right? In other words, you're seizing the moment. You're reading the room. What is the feel or the vibe inside of your generation or your society or your audience, right? Who is the audience? You need to think about Kairos, right? Perhaps if we gave out a argument against using fossil fuels and worsening climate change, we did that 60 years ago, perhaps no one really would care too much. But now that it's such a term and an idea that's in many people's minds, now's the time really to speak about climate change. That's the time, that's seizing the moment. So that makes your argument that much more effective. So it's really based upon time. All right. Now, if you're asked to do rhetorical analysis, which you will be doing in my class, really, what's the point of that? Well, of course, you're going to break down the text into its parts. You're going to find out what kind of appeals are being utilized, ethos, pathos, logos. Perhaps I'll ask you to do Kairos as well. 2, I want you to explain how that text persuades, informs, or entertains. So that might be, depend on the assignment. I'm going to ask you, does it entertain that group? Does it inform them? Does it persuade them? Please note that it's not, does it persuade you or does it inform you? Does it entertain you? That's not what we're looking for here. I'm asking you if it's entertaining, persuading, or informing that audience. Unless I ask you directly in the assignment, then you'd have to say, yeah, it informed me or persuaded me, right? Then we'll get into that larger argument. And then 3, Is the writer speaker successful? Are they successful in persuading, informing, or entertaining their audience? So you not just have to look at the argument or the text, but also, of course, who the audience is. Do you feel that that audience was taken in by what that speaker said or that writer wrote down? Now, here's a sample analysis, right? This is a text from the New York Times. It's an opinion piece, which is important to point out, right? This is Bret Stephens' opinion about reading George Orwell on the 4th of July, the same author that wrote 1984. This came out right before 4th of July, right? We can think about already Kairos is in motion here. He propelled this opinion piece right before July 4th came out to say something about the state of the United States, how we celebrate the 4th of July. We already have Kairos jumping out at us, right? But if we want to break this down further, we should do something that's called a rhetorical webbing. Let's pretend that this is the article that we're going to look at. This is just the beginning of it, but we can read through it, and most likely we can, in our minds, just say, okay, that sounds like a logos point, that's a pathos point, maybe an ethos point. But the best strategy I would say as a professor to do for my students is to actually print this out, or if you're able to PDF and edit it on your iPad or your computer, that's great too. You want to do a webbing. You want to actually interact with the text. That way you can see where these appeals are and then use them later for a rhetorical analysis essay, or perhaps you're going to do an argument in class or a debate in class. That's the best way to really gather your, in some sense, your ammunition for what you want to deploy as your argument, right? Now, in this sense, this is how I would go about doing it if I was using, let's say, my iPad or my computer. If not, I would take different color pencils, different color markers, whatever it may be, or use different symbols to say, okay, this is a pathos point, a logos point. But you'll see that now all of the arguments jump out at you. You know exactly where these arguments are coming from. We can see pathos, logos, and Kairos. I didn't do ethos here because that's something a little bit harder to do. We're going to talk about who the writer is. But in any sense, we can kind of tell that they must have done their research. They're featured in the New York Times. They know what's going on in the world right now, talking about Hong Kong, Russia, and Poland. So they are informed people. They are an informed writer. So we can tell, okay, they do know what they're talking about. But you might also notice within this analysis that various arguments are maybe 2 colors, maybe 3 colors. And you're right. Sometimes a logos point can also be a pathos point. If we bring up a fact that in some sense pulls on our heartstrings, then we might not only be saying, okay, that's a lot of people that have been affected by this disease, but that also makes us feel a certain way. So we would say, okay, this fact that X number of people have died from COVID-19 makes us also feel sad. So if our argument is to say we need to really tamper down on what we're doing with this disease and how it's affecting people in the United States, well, then maybe that's also persuasive, not just as a logos or a reasonable argument, but also an emotional one. We don't want more people to die. As noted here, back to the text, you can check that out later. You read through it yourself, but this is just one way that I would do it. And I'd ask for you to do it in class or at home. This is the most effective way I would believe to do it, right? So going from there, you can write out rhetorical webbing. What I would do is write down logos, pathos, ethos, and Kairos if you're asked to do so, and put those points that you found on the previous slide on your webbing. That way, when you want to write an essay and I say, okay, point out to me where the logos points are and were they effective in persuading or retaining the audience, you already have them listed and you can just go right to them and quote them in your text or talk about them in the class activity or whatever it may be. And so you can read through these and it'll give you a good idea. As I noted, we'll go back to ethos because we didn't list it in the last slide. But ethos, we can say, okay, well, this writer is featured in the New York Times, a credible news source. Stephens himself is an author, a veteran journalist. He's won the Pulitzer Prize. That's a great award for a writer to win. So we can say, okay, this person is credible. They are trustworthy. And then as we saw on the last slide, logos, pathos, and Kairos is featured on the last slide. So you can look through that all to yourselves. But as you get better at looking through an argument or a text or a meme or a video, whatever it may be, you'll become a better rhetorician. You'll be able to analyze what these arguments are and how they're working or not working, right? And then, of course, the ultimate goal is being able to write your own arguments. So by understanding rhetoric and becoming a better rhetorician, you're able to compose your own arguments whether it be advertisements, memes, tweets, arguments with your parents, whatever it may be, essays, of course, right? That will help you become a better writer and better understand how the world functions. Because as the meme here with Buzz and Woody says, rhetorical appeals are everywhere. Everything is rhetoric. Everything that is blasted at you on the internet or online or in comment sections or in society, just speaking interpersonally, right? That's rhetoric. It all depends on how you're persuaded, informed, or entertained by a certain text or argument, right? Okay, so as noted, that's there to help you understand how to do a rhetorical analysis essay. But of course, the overall social goal of this is for you to understand how rhetoric functions, how arguments function, how texts function, how in the end game to be a better rhetorician, to be a better writer, to be a better speaker, to understand the world better through the lens of rhetoric. All right, so hopefully that was entertaining, but also informative to you, right? I've shown you my credibility. I've shown you how rhetoric functions. Now, what I'd ask for you to do in your rhetorical analysis, I'm going to ask you to read a text or watch a TED Talk or perhaps take a look at a video, and I'll ask you to break it down in rhetorical appeals. Do the same thing. Do a rhetorical webbing on the side, and then you'll be ready to write your essay or talk in class for class discussion. So hope that was informative. If not, go ahead and give it another look. There's plenty of videos as well that discuss how rhetoric functions if this wasn't as clear as could be. But again, always email me or put a comment down below and I'll help you out. So hopefully that was informative. I'll see you all next time in the next video. Take it easy.